Chapter 1. The Monster in the Woods. The planet Elevaris was a world of bioluminescent beauty, a kaleidoscope of nature's artistry. Towering trees with sapphire leaves stretched high into the atmosphere, their trunks glowing faintly with the light of phosphorescent mosses. Rivers of translucent water shimmered under the soft glow of 3 moons, while tiny orbs of drifting light called whisperflies floated gently through the air like fireflies. It was a world untouched by the industrial sprawl that plagued many other planets in the galaxy, a place of serenity and balance. For the Illurians, the native inhabitants of Elevaris, this tranquility was sacred. Their crystalline bodies seemed to reflect the harmony of their surroundings, refracting light into dazzling rainbows that danced across the forest. They were a reclusive species, living in small, tight-knit communities and rarely venturing beyond their territories. Their culture revolved around the preservation of their environment, and they viewed outsiders with distrust, particularly since the stories of invading species and planetary exploitation had reached their quiet world. Leora, a young Illurian girl, was an oddity even among her own kind. She lacked the confidence and natural glow of her peers, her refracted light dimmer than most. While other Illurian children raced through the forests, their laughter echoing among the trees, Leora preferred solitude, tending to the luminescent plants near her home. Her village, Aerolis, perched on the edge of a vast forest, was a place of whispers and judgment for her. "She's too faint," one villager had murmured once, their tone laced with pity. "Her light barely reflects. She doesn't belong here," another had added. Leora had heard these comments more times than she cared to count. They stung deeply, though she tried to ignore them. Over time, she had become adept at fading into the background, her presence so unobtrusive that many barely noticed her at all. Whispers of the monster. The peace of Aerolis had been disrupted recently by unsettling rumors. Travelers from neighboring villages spoke of a strange creature lurking in the depths of the Mirkwood forest, a place even the bravest Illurians avoided. Descriptions of the creature varied, but all agreed on one thing: it was massive, with coarse, hairless skin, small, piercing eyes, and a guttural growl that sent shivers down the spine. "Perhaps it's one of the invaders from the stars," an elder speculated during a village meeting, their voice trembling. "Or something even worse," added another, their crystalline glow flickering with unease. The Illurians were a peaceful people, ill-equipped for conflict. They had no warriors or weapons, relying instead on their intimate connection with the land to protect them. The idea of a monster lurking in their sacred forest filled them with dread. For Leora, the stories of the monster were both terrifying and intriguing. She spent hours in the forest each day, gathering herbs and tending to the plants that provided her village with medicine and nourishment. The thought of a beast stalking her beloved woods made her heart race, but she couldn't help but wonder, was it truly as dangerous as the villagers claimed? A fateful encounter. One evening, as the sun set and the 3 moons began their ascent, Leora ventured deeper into the forest than usual. The air was cool and still, the whisperflies casting a faint, golden glow around her. She was searching for a rare herb known as lumenroot, which only bloomed under the light of a full moon. Her woven basket swung gently at her side, already half filled with glowing flowers and mosses. As she approached a small clearing near a bubbling spring, she felt a strange, prickling sensation at the back of her neck. The forest was unusually quiet, too quiet. No chirping of skylarks, no rustling of leaves in the breeze. Leora froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Something was watching her. Slowly, she turned, her wide, glowing eyes scanning the shadows. At first, she saw nothing. Then, movement, a figure emerging from the darkness. It was massive, far larger than any Illurian. Its skin was not crystalline but smooth and opaque, like the bark of a tree. Its eyes were small and dark, glinting faintly in the moonlight. The creature's shoulders were broad, its limbs thick and powerful. Leora's breath caught in her throat. This was the monster from the stories. The creature seemed as startled as she was, halting mid-step as their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Leora's instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs refused to obey. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if studying her. "Hello," it said suddenly, its voice deep but soft. The sound jolted Leora out of her paralysis. She stumbled backward, nearly dropping her basket. The creature raised its hands large, rough, and clearly non-threatening. "Wait," it said quickly. "I won't hurt you." The words were strange, spoken in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood. The creature took a cautious step forward, and Leora took an equally hesitant step back. You can speak," she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The creature nodded. "Yes, I'm human. My name is Ethan." Human. The word was unfamiliar to Leora, but it filled her with unease. Was this a predator? A spy? Or something else entirely? She clutched her basket tightly, her glowing eyes locked on Ethan. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice firmer this time. Ethan sighed, lowering his hands. "I crash-landed on this planet weeks ago. My ship was destroyed, and I've been stranded ever since. I mean no harm, I am just trying to survive." Leora frowned, her fear giving way to curiosity. She had heard of travelers from the stars, but they were rare and often brought trouble. Yet this human seemed different, lost, weary, and far from dangerous. Before she could respond, a distant howl echoed through the forest, sending a chill down her spine. Ethan stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "We should leave," he said urgently. "It's not safe here." Leora hesitated, torn between her instinct to flee and her curiosity about the strange being before her. Finally, she nodded. "Follow me. I know a safe place." A fragile trust. Leora led Ethan through the forest, her glowing figure a beacon in the darkness. She brought him to a small, hidden grove surrounded by dense trees and glowing mosses. It was a place she often retreated to when the whispers of the village became too much. Ethan sank to the ground, his broad shoulders slumping in relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "I didn't think I'd meet anyone who'd help me." Leora sat a safe distance away, her basket resting in her lap. "I'm not sure why I'm helping you," she admitted. "You're different, strange, but you don't feel like a monster." Ethan chuckled softly. "I've been called worse." They sat in silence for a while, the soft glow of the grove casting their faces in gentle light. Leora studied Ethan, noting the weariness in his eyes and the faint scars on his skin. He seemed so foreign, yet there was something in his expression, a quiet sadness that felt achingly familiar. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. Ethan shrugged. "Survive. Find a way to fix my ship, if that's even possible. If not, I don't know." Leora bit her lip, her shyness warring with her growing compassion. Finally, she spoke. "You can stay here, if you need to, but only for a little while. The others, they wouldn't understand." Ethan looked at her, his dark eyes softening. "Thank you, Leora. I won't forget this." The beginning of change. As the night wore on, Leora felt a strange sense of calm in Ethan's presence. He was nothing like the monster she had feared, and though she didn't fully trust him, she couldn't deny the spark of curiosity he ignited within her. For the first time, she felt that perhaps being different wasn't such a terrible thing after all. Chapter 2. The Bond Beneath the Stars. The days that followed were unlike anything Leora had ever experienced. Each evening, she returned to the hidden grove where Ethan, the mysterious human, had made a temporary shelter. She told herself it was to ensure he wasn't a threat to her people, but deep down, she knew there was more to it. Ethan fascinated her. His rough, earth-toned skin, his blunt manner of speaking, and even his strange clothing, all of it was so unlike the crystalline beauty and muted grace of her own kind. Ethan, in turn, seemed equally curious about Leora. He asked her about her people, her planet, and her way of life. At first, she answered hesitantly, unsure if she should trust him. But as their conversations grew, so did her confidence. She began to see a side of him that was gentle and kind, a stark contrast to the monster she had imagined. The forest's secret. One evening, Leora brought Ethan a basket of food she had gathered from the forest. The glowing fruits and herbs were unlike anything Ethan had seen, their bioluminescent light illuminating the grove. He accepted them with a grateful smile, his dark eyes softening. "You didn't have to do this," he said as he bit into a piece of lemon fruit, its juice leaving a faint glow on his lips. "I know," Leora replied, sitting cross-legged across from him. But I thought you might be hungry. Ethan chuckled. You're a lot braver than you think. Leora tilted her head, her crystalline eyes narrowing. What do you mean? You've been kind to me, he said, his voice thoughtful. Even though you were scared at first. Even though your people would probably be furious if they found out. Leora looked away, her glow dimming slightly. They wouldn't understand. They're afraid of anything different. And so am I, sometimes. Ethan's expression softened. Fear's natural, but it doesn't have to control you. Their conversation was interrupted by the distant howl of a shade beast, a predator that prowled the deeper parts of the forest. Leora stiffened, her glow flickering. Ethan stood, his hand instinctively moving to the crude spear he had fashioned from fallen branches and sharp stones. It's close, he said, scanning the trees. We should stay alert. Leora nodded, her heart pounding. Those shade beasts rarely ventured into this part of the forest. Their ferocity was legendary. Even the bravest Allurians avoided them. A dangerous encounter. Later that night, as they sat in silence beneath the glowing canopy of trees, a low growl echoed through the grove. Leora's breath hitched, and Ethan immediately rose, his spear at the ready. The growl grew louder, followed by the sound of snapping branches. From the shadows emerged a massive shade beast, its sleek, black body blending seamlessly with the darkness. Its glowing, red eyes locked onto them, and its jagged teeth glinted menacingly. Leora froze, her glow dimming to near invisibility. It's here, she whispered. Ethan stepped in front of her, his stance protective. Stay behind me. The shade beast lunged, its claws tearing through the air. Ethan dodged to the side, his spear slicing through the creature's flank. The beast roared in pain but didn't retreat. It circled them, its eyes glowing brighter with anger. Get to safety, Ethan shouted, his voice firm. No, Leora said, her voice trembling. I won't leave you. The shade beast charged again, and Ethan braced himself. But before it could strike, a sudden burst of light erupted from Leora. She had risen to her feet, her glow intensifying to a brilliant radiance that filled the grove. The shade beast recoiled, snarling in confusion. Run! Leora shouted, grabbing Ethan's hand. Together, they fled deeper into the forest, the shade beast's growls fading behind them. When they finally stopped, both of them were breathless but alive. That was incredible, Ethan said, staring at Leora in awe. You scared it off. Leora's glow dimmed as she sank to the ground, her body trembling. I didn't know I could do that. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Leora. Don't ever doubt that. The village's suspicion. Unbeknownst to them, the commotion in the forest had not gone unnoticed. The next morning, as Leora returned to her village, she found the Allurians gathered in the central square, their expressions tense. What happened last night? One villager asked, their crystalline glow flickering with unease. There was a disturbance in the forest. It was the monster, another said, their voice trembling. It must be getting closer. Leora kept her head down, her heart racing. She couldn't tell them the truth, not about Ethan, not about the shade beast, and certainly not about the light she had unleashed. The village elder, Meryl, stepped forward, her glow steady but dim. We must investigate. If the monster is truly encroaching on our lands, we must drive it away before it brings ruin upon us. Leora's stomach churned. She wanted to defend Ethan, to tell them he wasn't a monster, but she knew they wouldn't believe her. Instead, she remained silent, her thoughts racing. That evening, she slipped away from the village and returned to the grove. Ethan was waiting for her, his expression concerned. Something's wrong, he said as she approached. I can see it in your face. Leora hesitated, then nodded. The village knows something happened last night. They think it was you. Ethan sighed, his shoulders slumping. Figures. I've been called a monster before. You're not, Leora said firmly, her crystalline eyes meeting his. You're kind and brave and different, but you're not a monster. Ethan smiled faintly. Thanks, Leora. That means a lot. A fragile plan. They spent hours discussing what to do. Ethan couldn't stay in the grove forever. Eventually, the villagers would find him. But leaving Elavaris without a repaired ship wasn't an option either. I can help you fix your ship, Leora offered. There are parts in the village we can use. But we'll have to be careful. Ethan frowned. Won't that put you in danger? Leora's glow dimmed slightly, but her voice was steady. It's worth the risk. You don't belong here, Ethan. You deserve to go home. Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. And what about you? What do you deserve? Leora hesitated, her chest tightening. For so long, she had felt like an outsider in her own village. But here, with Ethan, she felt seen. Understood. I don't know, she admitted, but helping you feels right. Ethan reached out, his rough hand brushing hers. You've already done more for me than anyone else ever has. I won't forget it. As the stars began to fill the sky, they sat together in silence, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for the first time, they felt like they weren't facing it alone. Chapter 3. A Light in the Dark. The bioluminescent forest of Elavaris seemed quieter than usual as Leora and Ethan sat in their hidden grove, planning their next steps. Leora could feel the weight of the decision she had made to help him, and though fear tugged at the edges of her mind, she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. Ethan examined a small, glowing component from Leora's basket, a piece of discarded Allurian tech she had secretly collected from her village. His rough hands turned it over carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. This is good, he said, nodding. With a few more parts like this, I can probably get my ship running again. But I'll need something to power it. Your tech is different. It's powered by radiant crystals, Leora explained. They grow deep in the forest. The village harvests them sparingly, they're sacred. Ethan frowned. Sacred might make them a little harder to borrow. Leora hesitated, her glow flickering. If we're careful, I can get what you need. The elders won't notice if I take just one. Ethan shook his head. You've already risked enough. If they find out you've been helping me dash, they won't, Leora interrupted, her voice firmer than usual. I'll make sure of it. Ethan studied her, his dark eyes softening. You're braver than you give yourself credit for, you know that? Leora blushed faintly, her crystalline skin shimmering in the moonlight. I just don't want you to be stuck here forever. You deserve to go home. The village grows suspicious. As days turned into weeks, the tension in the village grew. The Allurians were on edge, their suspicions of the monster in the woods intensifying. Patrols were sent deeper into the forest, their soft glows cutting through the darkness like beacons. Leora found it increasingly difficult to sneak away to meet Ethan without being noticed. One evening, as she returned from the grove, she was stopped by Elder Merrill, the leader of the village. The elder's crystalline form shimmered faintly, her sharp gaze piercing. Leora, Merrill said, her tone measured. You've been wandering the forest often these days. Why? Leora's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. I've been gathering herbs for the healers, Elder. Merrill tilted her head, her glow flickering slightly. The healers have not requested such herbs. Tell me, child, have you seen anything unusual in the forest? Leora hesitated, her heart pounding. She knew Merrill was trying to draw the truth from her, but revealing Ethan's presence would endanger both him and herself. No, Elder, she said finally. The forest is quiet. Merrill studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But be careful, Leora. The forest hides many things, and not all of them are kind. As the elder walked away, Leora exhaled shakily. She needed to act quickly. Ethan couldn't remain hidden much longer. The radiant crystal. Leora and Ethan worked late into the night, piecing together what they could from the salvaged parts she had brought him. The small ship, nestled in a hidden clearing far from the village, was beginning to take shape, but without a radiant crystal, it would never fly. We'll have to go deep into the forest, Leora said, tracing a map she had drawn in the dirt. The crystals grow near the luminous caverns, but it's dangerous. The shade beasts roam there. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. If that's what we need, then let's do it. But I'm not letting you go alone. Leora glanced at him, her heart warming at his determination. We'll have to move fast. If the patrols find us, they won't, Ethan said firmly. We'll make it. The next evening, under the cover of darkness, they set out for the luminous caverns. The journey was fraught with tension, every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves making Leora's pulse quicken. Ethan kept his spear ready, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. When they reached the caverns, Leora gasped softly. The walls were lined with glowing crystals, their radiant light illuminating the jagged rock formations. At the center of the cavern was a cluster of particularly large crystals, their energy pulsing faintly. "That's it," Leora whispered. "The power core you need." Ethan moved forward cautiously, but as he reached for one of the crystals, a guttural growl echoed through the chamber. Leora's heart stopped. "Shade Beast," she whispered, her voice trembling. The Shade Beast returns. The massive predator emerged from the shadows, its red eyes glowing with malice. Its sleek, black body moved with predatory grace, and its sharp claws scraped against the stone floor. Ethan stepped in front of Leora, his spear raised. "Stay behind me." The Shade Beast lunged, its claws slashing through the air. Ethan dodged, thrusting his spear into its side. The beast roared in pain but retaliated, knocking him to the ground with a swipe of its paw. "Ethan!" Leora cried, her glow flaring in panic. The Shade Beast turned toward her, its growl deepening. Leora's breath caught as fear threatened to overwhelm her, but then she remembered the light she had summoned before. Closing her eyes, she focused all her energy, willing her glow to intensify. When she opened her eyes, her entire body was radiating brilliant light, flooding the cavern with blinding brilliance. The Shade Beast recoiled, snarling as the light seared its sensitive eyes. It retreated into the shadows, its growls fading into the distance. Ethan staggered to his feet, his expression a mix of awe and relief. "You did it again," he said, his voice hoarse. Leora's glow dimmed as she helped him stand. "I didn't think it would work." "It did," Ethan said, smiling faintly. "You saved us." A difficult farewell. With the Shade Beast gone, they retrieved one of the radiant crystals and returned to Ethan's ship. The crystal fit perfectly into the power core, its energy surging through the ship systems. "It's ready," Ethan said, his voice tinged with both relief and sadness. "I can leave now." Leora's heart sank. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't ready to say goodbye. Ethan had become more than just an outsider. He had become her friend, her ally, and perhaps even something more. "You'll finally get to go home," she said softly, forcing a smile. Ethan looked at her, his dark eyes filled with emotion. "And you'll stay here, where you belong." Leora hesitated, her chest tightening. "I don't know if I belong here. My village. They don't see me the way you do." Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "You're stronger than you think, Leora. You have a light inside you that no one can take away. Don't let them make you forget that." Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." As the ship's engines roared to life, Leora stepped back, her glow flickering faintly. Ethan gave her one last, lingering look before boarding the ship. The hatch closed, and the vessel lifted into the sky, disappearing into the stars. Leora watched until the light of the ship faded, her heart aching but filled with newfound determination. She would return to her village not as the faint one they dismissed, but as someone who had faced the darkness and found her own strength. Chapter 4. The Monster Becomes a Friend. The crackling hum of Ethan's repaired ship was a bittersweet melody in the quiet grove. The radiant crystal pulsed steadily in its housing, filling the ship with energy and life. Leora stood a few paces away, her crystalline skin reflecting the light as she watched Ethan prepare for his departure. It was a moment she had both feared and anticipated, a moment she wished she could delay but knew she couldn't. Ethan had come into her life like a whirlwind, turning her world upside down and showing her a kindness she had never known. Now, he was about to leave it. The village's final move. As they worked on the ship earlier that day, Elder Merrill had arrived at the grove with a group of villagers. The glow of their crystalline bodies bathed the clearing in an ethereal light, but their expressions were anything but peaceful. "We knew you were hiding something, Leora," Merrill said, her voice sharp. "You've been sneaking into the forest for weeks, and now we see why. This is the monster." Leora stepped between Ethan and the villagers, her heart pounding. "He's not a monster," she said firmly. He's a traveler, stranded here. He means no harm. Meryl's eyes narrowed. You've endangered the village by harboring him. Who's to say he hasn't summoned others like him to invade our world? That's not true. Leora protested. Ethan has done nothing but help me. He saved me from a shade beast and Dash. A shade beast? One villager interrupted, their glow flickering with alarm. You led a predator to our borders? Ethan raised his hands, his expression calm but resolute. I didn't come here to hurt anyone. My ship crashed, and Leora showed me kindness when no one else would. I just want to leave and go back to my people. Meryl hesitated, her gaze flicking between Ethan and Leora. If that's true, then leave now. But if you ever return, you'll find no sanctuary here. Leora's heart ached at the elder's words, but she nodded. He won't harm us. Please, let him go. After a tense moment, Meryl stepped back. Go, and take your machine with you. A heartfelt goodbye. As night fell, the villagers retreated, leaving Leora and Ethan alone in the grove. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. You didn't have to stand up for me like that, he said quietly. You've already risked so much. I couldn't let them hurt you, Leora replied, her voice trembling. You're not what they think you are. I know that now. Ethan smiled faintly. Neither are you. You've been braver than anyone I've ever met. Leora felt her cheeks flush, her glow flickering softly. I wish you didn't have to go. Ethan's expression grew serious. So do I. But if I stay, it'll only cause more trouble for you. Your people might not understand now, but maybe someday they will. Leora nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Will I ever see you again? Ethan hesitated, then reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, metallic device. Here, he said, pressing it into her hands. This is a communicator. If you ever need me, if you're ever in danger, use this. I'll come back. She clutched the device tightly, her crystalline eyes shimmering. Thank you. A new light. Ethan boarded his ship, the hatch closing behind him with a soft hiss. The engines roared to life, and the ship began to rise, its lights illuminating the grove one final time. Leora watched as it disappeared into the sky, a trail of starlight marking its path. For a long time, she stood there, staring at the place where the ship had vanished. The forest around her felt emptier now, but her heart was full. Ethan had shown her that being different wasn't something to fear, was something to embrace. When she returned to the village, she carried herself differently. Her head was held high, and her glow was brighter than ever. The whispers and judgmental stares no longer bothered her. She had faced her fears and found strength she never knew she had. Over time, the villagers began to see her in a new light. She became a healer, using her knowledge of the forest to help her people. And though they never spoke of the monster again, Leora kept the communicator close, a reminder of the friend who had changed her life. A promise among the stars. Years later, as Leora stood beneath the 3 moons of Elavaris, she gazed up at the stars and smiled. Somewhere out there, Ethan was exploring the galaxy, just as she was exploring her own place in the world. And though they were separated by the vastness of space, she knew their bond would never fade. In her heart, she carried the promise of their friendship, a light that would guide her through even the darkest nights.